Test. Test.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
Trusting your stuff with him.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Monday. I hope everyone enjoyed a good weekend. Bonjour à tous. I'd like to start today's Transit Commission meeting by recognizing not just one, but 4 OC Transpo employees who, during the month of June and July, went above and beyond the call of duty to help people in need. As many of you know, this acknowledgement is part of our TransSecure program, which is a well-established community watch program on wheels. OC Transpo staff act as the eyes and ears in the community and oftentimes help prevent serious incidents or life and death situations from occurring. Comme vous le savez, cette activité de reconnaissance fait partie du programme TransSecure, un programme bien établi de surveillance communautaire sur nos rues. Les employés d'OC Transpo, qui sont les yeux et les oreilles de la communauté, aident parfois à prévenir des accidents graves et même des situations de vie ou de mort. Just before dusk on June 9, an attentive bus operator became aware of a small boy by himself with no adults around on the sidewalk at the corner of Russell Road and Hague Drive. Phil, the bus operator, estimated the child to be between 2 and 3 years old. He quickly and safely pulled his bus over to provide assistance to the child and to contact the Transit Operations Control Center. Phil sheltered the child on the bus until Transit Law arrived. Once Transit Law arrived on scene, the special constable was able to confirm where the child lived, and soon after, the child was reunited with his parents. Phil's actions very well may have saved the young boy from serious harm that day. The child's parents were extremely grateful for the assistance OC Transpo staff provided in helping locate their son. In the early hours of July 8th, bus operator Devinder was driving into the parking lot at Pinecrest Garage to start his shift when he came across a fellow employee lying on the ground in the parking lot. Devinder immediately stopped his vehicle, ran to his colleague, who appeared to be in and out of consciousness, and provided aid. Without delay, Devinder called 911. Less than a minute later, bus operator Christopher pulled into the parking lot and provided further assistance. Moments before the ambulance arrived, Supervisor Eric, who happened to be in the area at the time, quickly proceeded to the scene and provided assistance. Once paramedics arrived, they requested that Eric perform chest compressions while they provided oxygen. Paramedics then transported the patient to the hospital. The assistance, care, and concern demonstrated by Christopher, Devinder, and Eric is another example of OC Transpos going above and beyond the call of duty to help someone in need. I'm so very grateful that Phil, Christopher, Devinder, and Eric are here with us today, and I'd like to invite them to join me here at the podium. À titre de président de la Commission de transport en commun, je tiens à vous féliciter d'avoir accompli votre devoir professionnel, celui d'offrir des services de transport en commun sûrs, sécuritaires et fiables à la population d'Ottawa. C'est grâce à des personnes comme vous que le programme TransSecure a des répercussions positives sur notre ville. It's my very distinct pleasure and honor to present certificates to the 4 employees. If you'd come up here to join me. Yeah, Phil. No matter what's on the agenda, that's always the best part of the meeting. So welcome members of the Commission to our meeting of 14 September. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, do we have confirmation of minutes from June 17? Carried. Thank you very much. Item number 1, status update, Transit Commission inquiries and motions for the period ending September 2. Received? Received. Thank you very much. Item number 2, we have a presentation as with item 3. So we'll go to item number 2, operating capital budgets Q2 status report. And Mr. Manconi, away you go.
I'll begin. Thank you very, very much, Mr. Chair. I'll present the first 2 slides talking about the overall Q2 results, and then Mr. Manconi will talk about some of the strategies to address the deficit. So as of June 30th, $7.7 million over budget, or 6.7. If we forecast that out to the end of the year, we expect an $11.5 million forecasted deficit, which is represent about 4.6% of the budget. The primary issues related to the deficit are higher insurance claims, approximately $1.6 million over budget in insurance claims. And the component parts and repair costs for articulated bus fleets were higher than expected, and that accounted for about $6.7 million of the deficit. So a large portion of the deficit is related to repair costs and maintenance. Cold weather operations also contributed to the deficit. Also, the Trillium Line maintenance contract renewal is higher than budgeted. And also, in terms of fare revenues, 1.3% below budget, which was partially due to lower fare types. And also, there was very little increase compared to 2014 in the same time period. In terms of how we're addressing the deficit, a large portion of it will be addressed by bringing some of the capital funds back into reserves. Capital project closures of about $2.7 million, and you can find the details for those in document 4, and those are projects that are complete and will be closed. And there's also identified were reductions to the current projects of about $5 million. And these were reductions that were primarily due to perhaps the contract was lower than originally anticipated, savings were identified, and the overall identified savings to those projects was $5 million, and those are found in document 3. The 2015 disposition report in March 2016 will recommend the use of reserve funds to cover the remaining deficit, if any.
Thank you, Isabel. Mr. Chair, members of committee, in terms of the strategies we're going to use for the managing this deficit, just before we get into that detail, I wanted you to know that even before these numbers were in, finance and myself and the management team mobilized, and we looked at every single scenario that we could to mitigate the costs. And in advance of the corporate spending freeze, we implemented a discretionary spending freeze of 20% across the board to look at everything big and small. And I want to emphasize that everything is being considered in terms of mitigation measures. With respect to the corporate spending freeze, there is a freeze on staffing. Exceptions are frontline positions. We need to deliver service, obviously, and support our customers. There was the management identified the elimination of 5 management positions. 4 of those were full-time and staffed, and so those positions were eliminated. And then I just also want to spend a minute to go through some of the details about the specifics, because I know there was a bit of confusion in terms of what some of the drivers were on the deficits. With respect to warranties on the articulated buses, that's for, I believe, 359 of our bus fleet. It's a large component of that. That warranty program, which has served us well, has come to an end, and so you have major components that need to be replaced, and the fleet needs to keep running. On revenue, again, I know there's been a lot of comments on that. We're at 99% of our revenue projection. Year-end we're going to be off by just over 1%. And I just want to emphasize that it's in transit. There's a lot of drivers, as you heard last year when we gave you that very detailed presentation on how we do forecasting and so forth. So it's very, very difficult to continuously adjust that model, which we do, but the predictability is driven by a lot of factors, the economy and inflation, weather, and so forth. On insurance, these are not related to the September 18th tragedy. I know there was a question on that. So these are insurance costs that we could not have predicted. With respect to cold weather, it is not about the snow. I want to make that abundantly clear. It is about the prolonged cold periods that we had last year, and I remind everybody we had a record-setting February. We had, I think you've heard me talk about what we do for cold weather and winter operations. We go into what's called enhanced operations. We had 57 days where we need to mobilize our forces into enhanced operations, and that's mechanics, tow trucks, extra services, and that served us very, very well because we had no major interruptions during those prolonged cold weather days. And we set a new standard, not one that we like to see, but 15 days of enhanced operations last winter during February. And then with respect to the Trillium line, that is a very old contract. The last time that was publicly tendered was 7 years ago. And so we went out for tender, and there's increased costs that the market brought forward. It's 6 trains versus 4. There's more passing tracks, there's more signals, there's more switches. Those all have to be maintained. So those are some of the issues around the drivers. And our focus right now is to continue to run really good service, support our customers, but also we're very cognizant of watching the bottom line. And as the Deputy Treasurer noted, we've done a very detailed assessment of all the WIPs and the capital works. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manconi. I've got a list going for questions, so we'll go to Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Chair Blair, and thank you for the presentation, Mr. Manconi, Madame Jasmine. A couple of questions, just for clarification. On the report, can you tell me why the figures on Table 1, page 4, are different than Document 1? What's the...
So the difference is the net number is the same. But in Table 1, the paratranspo is combined with the overall operations, but in the Document 1, paratranspo is shown as a separate line item.
Okay, thank you. Is the cost cutting that you speak about in at the top of page 4, the discretionary spending and the management positions, it's reflected in the forecasts that we're seeing to year end?
Yes, it is.
It is, okay. Can you tell me, are you able to tell me the cost of severance of the management positions?
Mr. Chair, that number varied. It depended on years of service and just sensitive to the labour relations aspect of it in terms of publicly releasing some of that information. I looked to Mr. O'Connor in terms of guidance in that regard, but there were severance costs to it, one-time severance, and the elimination of the costs of those.
I can get an aggregate if that's appropriate.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we can probably look at that. Generally speaking, the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario has deemed severance to be a disclosable item in public. However, having said that, where there might only be one individual who received severance, or even 2 where it's possible that one's very new and you could figure out they got very little and the other one got the bulk of it, that would be something else. But we could certainly look at that and distribute something later if necessary.
The severance costs are included in our expenditure forecast to the end of the year and probably budgeted in 2016 if that's appropriate?
The savings are built in for this year and beyond operating, and then there was a one-time fund that finance provided.
Right. Of the $11.5 million projected deficit to the end of the year, as you say, revenue is about 1%, and a lot of it is in cost control. You spoke of staff, of discretionary spending. What other cost controls can you elaborate on? Can you elaborate on the cost controls and the discretionary spending that you're looking at?
Yes, on the discretionary spending, it's everything from stationary to travel, so all non-essential travel has been eliminated. If it's not business related, for example, we do go and inspect our bus builds, that we will permit, but we're not going to conferences. The other thing is I looked at every single line item myself to see if the trend line showed that the spending wasn't occurring, big or small. We've done that. I've tasked the management team, for example, Mr. Scrimger, on printing eliminating printing of maps in certain areas that we don't see an uptake in terms of that because we've got stuff on our website and so forth. So it's a wide range of big and small things. What we are being very sensitive to is operating hours to continue to provide service and maintenance hours to continue to provide the buses for day-to-day service.
Do you have any, are you able to comment in any way on the anticipated results to September 30th at this time? Do we have an idea of revenue and any movement in the revenue line item, in the expense line item to September 30th?
I can speak to ridership, which has a direct relation. So ridership continues to remain flat, so it's not increasing, it's not decreasing. I think it was off by 0.1%, so that's level of accuracy. And those were the recent numbers I've just received last week. So we're flat on ridership. So that'll have effect on the revenue line. We're going to continue. You see some offsets in terms of advertising revenue. Our marketing team is doing a very good job of trying to get as much of that revenue as we can to do some offsets, and we'll continue to do that.
The costs are still elevated in terms of warranty, in terms of the other costs that you spoke of. We're still on track at September 30th that it will be 11.5 at year end, I guess is my question.
Based on what I've seen right now, I'm comfortable saying it will not be less, but I have asked Finance Department to go through and see if there's any other revenue lines that perhaps haven't been booked or we're lagging behind and so forth. Capital recoveries, we do a lot of that. We're looking at that. So I haven't seen any indicators to tell me it's going to be more favorable. On page 3 of the report, am I to understand that we're going to be funding the 11.5 with $5 million from document 3 in terms of the budget adjustments and $2.7 million from document 4, and that's 7.7. And that the other 3.8 million will be made up of, I think Ms. Jasmine said reserves, but page, the document says reduced capital expenditures next year. Is that?
So for 2015, it will be taken from the reserves, and then in 2016, we'll be reducing capital to replenish those reserves.
By that 3.8,
yeah.
Extra 3.8
yes.
million.
Correct.
Okay. Just one last question for your consideration, because I'm confident that it's been looked at. On document 4, if I look at a couple of projects, fuel reduction strategies, hybrid propulsion replacement, 906, 963, 906, 964, are being recommended for abandonment. They haven't started yet. My caution is, what will be the effect of the abandonment of these programs? I'm sure there was a return on investment of these programs in terms of reduced fuel consumption in the upcoming years. Are we being penny wise, pound foolish in abandoning these projects that will cost us in future years in terms of increased fuel consumption? Can you reassure me that?
That's a very good question, Councillor. I'll start with the hybrid conversion to diesel. That plan that was generated a few years ago, where we had some performance issues in terms of achieving all our savings on the hybrid buses, and I want to say publicly it's because it's a complicated model to manage those hybrid buses on specific routes and so forth. What we're doing there is, with the opening of the Confederation line, we'll be shedding our bus fleet. Obviously, there'll be fewer buses. Our management team has done a very good look at how can we prioritize and get our end-of-life buses off the books and hybrids, as it maps out, come right within that 15-year life cycle. So that's issue number one. Issue number two on that project is we brought in NRC to do a preliminary look at whether or not the return on investment on a conversion from hybrid, and their first generation hybrids, by the way, the old battery cells, is worth doing. And the costs are very significant, and so we're doing the financially prudent thing and saying, well, let's not go down this road. So we're lucky in that we have to reduce our bus fleet in 2019 when the Confed line opens in 2018, so we'll do that. To bridge us from there until then, Mr. Greer, who's our fleet manager, Mr. Charter, are negotiating an extended maintenance program for the batteries on those hybrid buses, which will drive down our maintenance costs and get us to 2019 on the hybrid fleet. So we're returning that I think it's $500,000 back to reserves because we don't need those funds. On the fuel strategies, we've done, you can always do more, but one of the things I'm a stickler with is, you know, you've got a capital budget just like your own household. You manage that for what it was intended to do. So we've done the automated fuel dispensing project. So you'll recall when we did our tour, we explained how that worked. Now we have automated fuel management, so we know how much those vehicles are consuming. We have done the training with CUDA on our bus operators, so they do a trip the normal way that they do it every day. We then come back with a fuel expert and tell them to drive differently, and we give them generated results. There's a long list of initiatives that we've done. We've done a very good job on our idling policy and so forth. You could always do more and continue to do more, but we don't see any big wins in that fuel management envelope. So the prudent thing is to return those funds and close that project off. So to answer your question, there's nothing in there that I've seen that would help us in terms of alleviating some of the pressures. So the right thing financially is to return that and help do the offsets.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Houche. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little concerned about the fact that we're taking money out of capital and putting it into operating, because that's always been a policy that you separate the two out and you don't depend on your capital budget to handle operating, because the next year that just clobbers your operating budget. So I'm looking at this in impact and the impact it will have on next year's budget as opposed to this year. I think there's a few things that probably could have done better in the budget a year ago that would not have, we would not have quite as serious a problem as we have right now. But for example, the high insurance costs, they're not predicted. But are these things that we might have been able to predict, and are they things that are going to be likely showing up in the future again? So what kind of things are these?
Yes, Councillor, a couple of things, and I'll certainly get Mr. O'Connor to speak on the insurance piece as he handles that for us. Just on the capital strategy, you recall the city manager issued a memo in July stating that, you know, we had arbitration rulings, we had deficits running, and so that was the strategy that was going to be used. By no means, and I can assure you that we don't use capital to fund operating on a normal basis. This is to manage the deficit, and I'm certainly cognizant of what it can do to your future capital years. So we've got those lanes defined. It's not like we're doing it on a daily basis. With respect to insurance, I do want Mr. O'Connor to comment, as I think the insurance world is, or the claims world is changing us a little bit right now. You know, we're seeing some spikes in terms of claims and people going to litigation and so forth. So I'll just ask Mr. O'Connor, I have nothing in my crystal ball that would have changed my insurance predictions last year, as I do not have anything now for future years.
Does Mr. O'Connor have any ball that he's looking at?
Mr. Chair, I also do not have a crystal ball. Having said that, we recognize that there is a trend, not just with OC Transpo, but with all litigation, and members of the Commission who are on Council will recall that previously AMO has been working towards reviewing with the province the 1% rule under the Negligence Act, which says if a municipality is found to be 1% negligent, and if the other defendants in a particular case cannot pay for their proportional part of the damages, then the municipality will pay for them all. However, last year the province abandoned its review of the Negligence Act and said they were not about to do that. Having said that, there are also, with the courts, part of the trend, and I'm just facilitating, they look at loss of past and future income, a relatively new development of loss of competitive advantage when they're looking at damages, which is someone's future promotional opportunities. They're looking at past and future health care, housekeeping expenses, and family law claims. So there's a variety of these types of claims when we go down the path of settling that we have to look at actuarial amounts for each and every one of those. But I think it's a trend, Mr. Chair, that is all across the province and not just limited to transit matters.
Did you just say the 1% rule that doesn't apply anymore? I couldn't
Oh,
hear.
no, sorry. To be absolutely clear, the 1% rule continues to apply, and that the province has decided as of last year, I think shortly after the election, that they were abandoning the review or reform of the Negligence Act. So
is there any work being done to get that back on the table?
I think AMO continues to work at that, and we would certainly work with AMO and encourage that.
I think that's important. Okay, the other thing on the maintenance of the buses, we knew that last year that you were not going to have those warranties still in existence at a certain time, and you obviously had to budget that you would be doing the maintenance on those from then on. The problem is that you didn't realize how much maintenance, or were they not doing the maintenance during the warranty period that they should have done that ended up giving us higher costs?
No, staff were doing what they needed to do, and you recall during the budget discussion, I believe it was Mr. Cloutier, Councillor Cloutier, that raised the, he wanted an understanding of what was built into the budget and what were some of the issues and challenges, and I specifically reiterated about how fleet was going to have a big challenge in terms of managing the fleet, in terms of some of the warranties that were coming off, and parts management and so forth. The challenge on the warranty piece is, yes, it's the first year, but we don't know what kind of a trend was going to come forward. So for me to give, we had some preliminary numbers that we gave to finance, but you know, I think they were in the $5 or $6 million range in terms of potential pressures. It was a risk that was built into the budget in terms of let's see what trends start to occur. Those trends have materialized. And so now the components are there, and the costs are there, and the maintenance needs to occur, which continues to ensure that the bus count that we've, remember our tour that we talked about, a number of buses that need to go out every single morning. Fleet has done an outstanding job of making sure those vehicles are ready for service, and so it's that challenge in terms of fitting into everything.
I know it's very tight because we don't have a lot of room to maneuver if you have a lot of breakdowns.
That's correct. Our spare ratio is very, very tight.
And we did budget, I think, for the amount of extra costs because of longer runs and things because of the construction that's going on now, particularly for the light rail. Have those projections actually worked out about right what you had expected? It's really hard to tell from this information.
Yes, so the detour work, both the capital, the operating, the routes and so forth are funded from a capital envelope out of the LRT budget. I believe
operating as well?
Yeah, yes, it's transferred into our budget. So all those detour costs, that was part of your $2.1 billion approval in terms of all of the contracts with the P3 arrangement, and so they're in that envelope. So they fund the extra running time with all those runs.
Of those runs, but not the extra running time of the other runs which aren't directly impacted but are because of the delays in one area. The interlining that we have means a problem somewhere reflects almost everywhere.
Actually, Councillor, thanks to the Treasurer and the Deputy Treasurer, we've done a really good job in the last 2 years. We now have a charge back to capital and infrastructure services for delays of any construction detour. So we model that out. Mr. Scrimger and his team look at what the impacts are, and we add extra running time on those construction-related detours. So those are recovered also.
Okay, that's good. The elimination of the 5 management positions. I take it this was a planned part of your work that you've been doing in order to looking at the whole operation and make sure that you have a very efficient operation. I don't think this was related to directly to try to save money, was it, in this for the deficit?
It's a combination of we're always looking to be efficient. I can tell you that the way I've operated for 26 years, whenever there's a management position, my first question is do you really need to fill it? Hence why one of those 5 was vacant. It was on the books. We are also doing an organizational realignment in terms of getting ready for the light rail. So that opportunity was identified as a potential we could change the management structure. Finance gave us an opportunity with a one-time funding on it because there was a direct derivative to saving on the operating deficit that we have right now. So it was a timing opportunity, and we seized it, and a very difficult decision as 4 people had to go home without employment.
Yeah, it sure was. Are you continuing to take a look at that, though, to see if there are other positions that might be with this realignment, or have you completed that?
The management realignment is going through its final stages right now. So we did the senior management team last year. We've done the one that you just saw, and there's some final tweaking that occurs when we go to LRT. I believe there's another 3 further reductions, but those will be handled through attrition with timing.
Okay. One of the things that you are canceling, or I think more likely postponing, is the upgrading of the trip planner and some of the IT work that was underway. Is that the idea of that one, that you're taking it off the books now, but it will be coming back in a year or 2, or how are you handling? Because some of those things are going to need to get done somewhere along the line.
Mr. Chair, for the most part, the reductions that are documented here are parts where the cost has come in lower than was originally expected when the project was set up, or where the project has now been completed and we're able to close the account.
I'm talking about the ones you haven't started yet. The ones that were in that list in chart document 4 that you decide they're capital projects that hadn't started yet, mostly, or very little, and you're just canceling the project, it looks like to me.
Some of those are an amount we have. If we'll get a program of funding approved, repetitively over the years to keep some projects going. In these cases, this funding isn't required based on having completed some of the work or based on the prices that the costs are coming in at. None of these are reductions in the work, of planned work.
And so there are things we don't need to do at all? If it makes me wonder why they're there in the first place.
They're money we don't need to complete the work.
These are new projects, some of them. They're not old.
They're new. Mr. Chair, I believe for the most part, we can go through specifics, but I believe for the most part they're new requests for money to sustain an ongoing program. But if there's a specific we can look at, I'd be happy to look.
Or look like...
Councillor,
if
you have a specific item, I think that might be helpful.
About the 2016 budget, I'm very concerned about the use of capital project funding for operating for the whole city, not just for your operation. I think it's a very bad way to go because it does impact on our ability to do the capital programs we need, but it also means that we're taking maybe $4 or $5 million this year from capital of various types to sustain our operating. Next year we have to find that $5 million in operating plus whatever inflation there is, which means we have a huge pressure on operating budgets next year because we can't continue to rob the capital budgets. And I think it's more a finance problem, but I think we have to have a very strong look at this particular budget coming up to ensure that we're both accurate, and we may have to cut some programs back because I don't think we have the kind of, even if we put a 3 or 4% increase on the taxes, we'd be able to handle it.
So, Mr. Chair, I think there's some important points in that question or comment. I would just want to assure the councillor and the rest of the commission, the principles we applied to the capital reduction or elimination was, I was very specific, nothing that you have approved. I'll give you an example. The Transportation Master Plan can be compromised. So don't go in there and start freelancing and reducing a bunch of things that were in the Transportation Master Plan. And you're not going to just keep spending because you have money in the capital. And I want to give you an example. So there's some vehicles on growth that were planned. We've put that on pause and we said, okay, let's take another look at that because we now know what the designs are for all the new stations and we need different type of equipment for maintenance for the multi-use paths and so forth. We also looked at our fleet composition. Now that we know what 2018 looks like in terms of the bus fleet reduction and so forth, what's our sequencing for replacing the bus fleets and so forth. So I just want to give you some assurances that it's about if your tender prices have come in for the project that was scoped out and what was approved in that budget sheet that you approve as the Board of Governors, that continues on. But just because your prices came in and you have a couple $100,000 savings doesn't mean you keep spending. You don't. You don't find things to
I know,
do
but what we normally do is we put it back into the reserves that are used for capital. And that's what we normally do with the money that's left after any capital project. This year we're using that to look after what projected deficit. It's a one-time thing. It's been done before. I know that, like in smaller amounts. So this is for the overall city is rather large amounts this year, and it's just a warning flag that we have to be very, very cautious about. I think in the 2016 budget. So we're going to be. I think you're going to be getting some questions just to make sure that what you're just saying today actually turns out to work. That's all. And I think it's not just this budget. I don't think you're very careful, but it's every budget in the city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I do agree. I think the upcoming budget is going to be a difficult one, and certainly we'll need to be prudent in all aspects of it. I'd like to remind the Commission we did put $1 million in new service in this year to support growth in Canada and Barrhaven and in some parts of the downtown. I'm not saying it was an unwarranted investment. I'm reminding people that we put $1 million in new service in. So when we're talking about making cuts, I think we have to be cognizant of the new investments we've just made within the last 6 months. Councillor Eglai.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. One of the things that concerns me a little bit is that the term you've used a couple of times in your presentation for ridership is it's flat. And of course, for the service to survive, we need people in the buses and the trains. So have we given any thought to how we can address, I appreciate it's at, somewhere between 1% and 2%, but have we given any thought to how we can bring people back or bring new people on? I'm thinking of, might even sound a little crazy, but, have one day where everybody rides for free. I know that costs money, but sometimes you have to spend money to make money. And sort of say, if you've never tried OC Transpo, here's the day to try it. Get on the bus, tell us what you think about it. Celebrity ambassadors. We've seen the NAC do that. We've seen the Royal Ottawa do that. I go to the NAC and my name is so-and-so. I mean, have we thought of things like that going forward to bring new people on?
Yes, we have. I mean, I think you've heard me before. Your Free Days Canada Day, you pay for that through your budget right here through marketing. And we see hundreds of thousands of people on that, and we get positive feedback.
I get that, but I mean, what I'm thinking of is giving people the real experience, right? Canada Day is not the real experience. That you're not going to work, you're not going to school, And again, I understand that may cost money, but if you did it on a Tuesday and said, "This is what it'd be like if you took the bus to work," that sort of thing.
So yes, we've thought of some of that. That costs money. I get calls, emails. I've had meetings from marketing firms since I took this job, and they give me their pitch, and I always say the following. So let's guarantee the ridership, and that way if the ridership goes up, I pay you, and I don't have to pay you for your advertising strategy, because all this stuff costs money, and it racks up very, very quickly. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to do programs like you're talking about, and the conversation always seems to end at that point. Because everybody brings these sales pitches about, you can do ads, you can do promotions, you can do I do remind you, there's 24 ambassadors, there's 3,000 ambassadors that we have. That's you folks. People follow you on Twitter and Facebook and so forth. I can tell you that when members of council take the bus and tweet that out, there is positive reaction from customer groups, from staff, and so forth. So certainly, if there's, I know I'm meeting with Commissioner Mallow. He has some ideas that he wants to talk about those things. If there's opportunities, I just remind you that we're in a difficult financial situation, so none of those advertising and promotion programs come free. But if there's some things you'd like us to explore, I'm very happy to do that.
No, and I get it that it doesn't come for free, and you're preaching the convert it. I'm a regular user. I call it my rolling office, and often have chats with constituents on the bus. It just concerns me when we're a transit service and our customers are falling off, and I just want us to think about that a little bit. The maintenance issue related to the end of the warranty program, is this a bump, or is this going to be a continuing trend upwards now that the buses are getting a little bit older and we don't have the warranty program in place? I know a few years ago, I believe we did a review of our maintenance programs or internal maintenance programs, and I'm wondering if that will help offset the loss of the warranty program.
So that's a new base, and you'll see in our future forecasts we're building that in. What helps us in terms of containing that new base is the refurb program that you fund through capital. So our buses now, when they reach 7.5 years lifespan, we actually do a refurbishment program. So they're stripped down, they're overhauled, and that continues the life to the 15-year cycle. And then optimizing the fleet based on what happens in 2018 is going to help us all. But yes, this is a new base. Just like your own car, the warranty has come off, and now you have to start paying full costs for the warranty components. And I will emphasize, that was a very, very good warranty program, unheard of in the bus industry. 5 years, bumper to bumper, pretty much. I doubt you'll ever see that again.
Okay, but you're confident that the refurb program will help offset some of the costs for the loss of maintenance? Is that what you're saying?
It'll help contain how significant that number becomes. If you don't do the refurb, it'll get worse. But this bump is now at the new base for that fleet.
Okay, fair enough. Now, you spoke to the cold weather, not the snow, but the cold weather, and we had some sustained periods there. It was almost like a pilot project. Have we drilled down on last winter and come up with some ideas, some efficiencies, so if we ever experience that sort of prolonged cold again, that we know how to tackle it now and in the most cost-efficient way, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yes, Mr. Charter did a debrief. I think in terms of is there more efficient ways to do it, always you can look at that. The issue for us is that we met service just about every single, well, we met service every single day during those cold winters in terms of bus count and so forth. Keep doing that again. One of the things that you'll hear myself and finance department is you budget to average. I wouldn't suggest that we bump up and budget to that extreme cold. I mean, what are the chances of another February being that cold again? But everything that we did, I think, was very well done, and if there's any efficiencies, we'll certainly mine those out.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a debrief that was done by Mr. Charter. Is that something that can be shared with members of the committee offline? Sort of a memo telling us lessons learned from and how to deal with that.
I'd be happy to take you through what we did, what we learned from it, and how we actually execute that operation.
I think that would be helpful. Thank you. And the final question, I guess, is what does this mean going forward? Some of these things you said are new bases or new trends. So what does this mean for the 2016 budget in broad strokes?
I see the treasurer's here, so if I can do some comments and then turn it over to her. So I think on ridership, I believe that's your new base. That's the only positive I can mine out of ridership is that it's not declining. It's been steady at that 97 million. So that's the new reality in terms of where we are on ridership. We have the right experience, I believe, on what those warranty issues are, so we'll build that into the budget and has been built in. We know where we're going in terms of the future, in terms of your long-range affordability plan, your Confederation line, and so forth. So it's about doing a good job in terms of containing and looking at opportunities. And also we're working with the Finance Department on identifying opportunities for efficiencies and putting some targets on efficiency numbers for doing more.
Okay, perhaps for the treasurer jumps in, just a quick follow. You talked about the 97 million being the new base. Can you remind us again what the projections are, though, for ridership once the LRT kicks in?
I don't have those off the top. I just looked to Marion in terms of there was I know the forecast was there was continued growth because when the modeling was done, in fairness to all those that were part of that, we were on the increase in terms of ridership, and so all the effects of the federal government and so forth hadn't kicked in. But I don't have that number off the top. We can certainly get it for you offline.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So for 2016, we'll be incorporating all of the items that are driving this deficit as pressures in 2016. I'll remind you, though, that what we're doing as part of the longer-term look is we're refreshing the affordability model, and part of that will be incorporating these new pressures. And also, as Mr. Manconi addressed, your capital isn't set in stone. It changes to reflect your new realities, and your decline or your flat ridership means basically you will not be making some of those investments you thought you had to make based on an escalating ridership number. So we're bringing forward, most likely in the first part of 2016, the refreshed affordability model to look at your stage 2, but part of that will inform the work we're doing now on the 16, 17, and 18 budgets will inform that affordability. So while I can't say definitively at this time, when we bring forward the guideline report in October, we will be addressing the problems that we're seeing with OC Transpo in that report.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Councillor Eglin. I was looking back in the budget slides. The bus refurbishment this year was $24.5 million for the budget presentation. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask a couple of questions, I guess, around the reduced ridership that we saw. We saw a certain number of people who are existing customers choose to spend less with OC Transpo, and then there is a certain assumed growth that did not take place. I've heard you say, Mr. Manconi, through a couple of meetings now, it's a lot of factors that go into ridership and whether it increases or decreases. What, in your feeling, didn't pan out with respect to the budget? Do you have any feeling as to whether it was continued employment difficulties in Ottawa? We know we've seen fare hikes. I'm curious to see what effect those are going to have on future ridership. What didn't work with respect to the forecast?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask Pat, just if I can, just to talk a little bit about ridership, because one of the things I had a very good discussion with the city manager and the treasurer about exactly that point. What's going on? What's caused this? And what Pat is going to talk to you right now is, yes, we'll go through what the things that influence ridership, but I'll tell you right now, and when Kent and Marion saw it, the regression model that we normally follow to a T, something has shifted. And whether it's, we've heard recession, we've heard all those things, but our model that used to follow that, as you'll see in a moment exactly, has tipped. And so, for over a year we've been talking about this, and I know people are going, okay, here we go, employment levels again and so forth, but transit sometimes is a leading indicator out there. When someone doesn't have a job, whether it's part-time or full-time, they start to shed costs. And the easiest thing to shed, especially if you're on Presto right now, is you can just, hey, I'm not taking the bus anymore, and so forth. And you can tell those people to take the bus all you want, but if they don't have somewhere to go, they're not going to take your bus. And so if I can, Mr. Chair, I'll just get Pat to walk through 2 or 3 slides about to speak to Mr. Leeper's question.
Thanks, John. Mr. Chair, we've had a very consistent relationship between 3 major input factors and transit ridership going back for many, many years. Employment has explained 80% of the change, whether it's an increase or a decrease. The weather, whether it's sunny, rainy, warm, cool, explains 15% of the change. And gasoline prices the month before explain about 5% of the change. And those 3 things, and those 3 things alone, have over the years explained 92% of all the variability, both up and down, month to month and year to year, in transit ridership. And as I say, that's been consistent through good times and recessions, through major service reductions, major service increases, consistent after varying levels of fare increases. And this shows the green shows the actual ridership by month going from 1996 to 2012. And the yellow shows the retrospectively predicted ridership based on just those 3 factors. And you can see that there's been a few months where we go a little bit high and a few months where we go a little bit low, but that yellow line follows that green line almost exactly over that complete span of time. But when you extend that through to 2015, you can see that in the last 3 years, the green line, the actual ridership, has been lower than the retrospectively predicted ridership. The green line is below the yellow, and you can see that's consistent over the last 3 years and that it's never happened before. And what that indicates to us is that there's something else affecting transit ridership in addition to those 3 things. We know a number of things that it's not, but we think that what it may be is employment proportionately where it's located across the city. How much of that employment is downtown and how much of that employment is in less congested areas where driving a car or traveling other means is more attractive. We think that's what it is, but we can't know that's what it is because we don't have that detail of where is employment actually occurring on a month-by-month data source. If we could get this information from the federal government, being the largest employer, we'd be able to include that in the model and see whether, as they've moved jobs from downtown to Gatineau, from downtown to Barrhaven, from downtown to the Nortel location, if they've moved jobs, or as if the jobs that they've reduced out of Ottawa have been primarily downtown jobs and not jobs across the rest of the region, if those are the sources, we'd be able to include that in the model. At this point, that blue area there that's below the line where we're seeing that negative variance from our prediction, that's the amount that we can't say what it's from, but we strongly suspect that it is a loss of downtown employment disproportionately to a loss of employment across the whole region.
Thank you for that. That is excellent. So the hypothesis as it relates to the distribution of employment through the city, you're saying it's going to be really difficult to test that hypothesis because we don't have that granularity of information. If I may just ask you to take one more step, what is it about the distribution of employment in the city that affects that ridership? Is it people who can't get easily to a suburban location and thus choose to take the car instead?
Mr. Chair, Ottawa has been for many, many, many years and likely still is one of the highest ridership per capita cities on the continent, apart from those cities that are very large. So if you set aside New York, Chicago, Boston, Toronto, Montreal, and you look at cities that are not immense, you will see that Ottawa is consistently very high, much, much, much higher per capita ridership than every city of its size, except sometimes in some years for Calgary. Ottawa and Calgary, far higher transit ridership per capita than any other. In the case of Ottawa, we think it's because we have a major employer who doesn't provide parking, a major employer who does locate most of its jobs in the core. We have a city council which has invested primarily in transit for economic growth and not so much in road capacity. There's been no additional road capacity into downtown for, I believe, 40 years now. So all of the growth that has occurred and all of the more jobs that have occurred that have been downtown they've had to take transit. They do take transit. So it's not, it is that we've been at this very high level and we're still at a very high level. We're just slightly less high than we were. If we were like other cities, we would have acres and acres of downtown parking. We would have expressways that lead right into downtown. We'd have multi-story parking garages taking up space in downtown. And we'd have many, many more people working in inaccessible suburban areas along highways, and we just don't have that here. We've got small, contained suburban workplaces, which are certainly auto-oriented, but not exclusive of transit. We have good transit service to all of those locations. But there is also generally uncongested roads and generally free parking. And so the competitive balance between transit and auto is different for someone who works at Confederation Heights or at the airport or in Canada North than it is for someone who works at Kent and Queen downtown.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's, I am really pleased to get that very clear insight into what the corporation is thinking with respect to ridership.
Sorry, Councillor, can I just add one other thing on that? We are not alone here. Vancouver is down. Montreal is going flat. Gatineau, and there's the other slide there. So there is something happening Canada-wide also, and so there's comparables there to us, but just wanted to add that also.
What is the forum in which that is discussed? What is the forum in which transit authorities discuss what might be happening there if something new is happening?
So Chair Blais is on the CUDA board, as am I. I'm on the director board. He's on the executive board, and you know, I certainly intend to bring this up in terms of that. When I saw Vancouver and Montreal, other areas that were growing exponentially, going flat, I intend at the director level to table this. To say, you know, what is causing some of this. And, you know, they've got some good research people there, and we're going to hook them up with people like Pat to see if we can get some dialogue going on.
Thank you. I don't know if I have a lot of time left, Chair Blais. I've got a few more questions. Thanks.
I'm not keeping time just because of the nature of the subject matter today.
The second question, it's probably less concerning, but the $600 million deficit. Sorry, one of the things I might ask the corporation to do moving forward is the unfavorable variance language has some of my residents confused. I wonder if we might call them deficits or something a little bit clearer in future. But there is a unfavorable variance of $600,000, the result of higher software maintenance. To what is that owed? And are we addressing it through upgrading? I presume that's software that is no longer supported by the vendor or something like that.
Sorry, Councillor, can you point me to the...
Sure. On page 5, Management and Administration, there's the $600,000 unfavorable variance, which is mainly the result of higher software maintenance costs. And I'm just wondering if we can unpack that a bit.
Could you give us a minute? We'll get the answer offline, and we'll circle back with you on that one.
I don't know. And then I have to presume that there is a plan in place to address that moving forward.
Mr. Chair, the cost of maintaining software has been going up across the transit industry. These were changes that came, these were cost increases that came in for our major operational and customer service, our major systems. We pay an annual software maintenance fee, and those costs have come in higher this year than they were in previous years and than they were budgeted to be.
Do we have a notion of whether those fees will remain relatively flat for a few years, or do you anticipate these kinds of increases moving forward?
We don't have that information. We don't expect that they will go down from the location they've come to. So we'll be budgeting at this level and asking those companies for their best forecast of what their own costs are going to be.
Okay. And then I do have a few questions with respect to some particular line items that are in the capital budget adjustments document, document 3, I believe, but I'll go in the order that they're presented in document 2. I share Councillor Commissioner Wilkinson's concern that we don't want to defer capital work that does need to be done to later budgets. So I'm just looking for some comfort that with respect to 4 or 5 of these line items that it is work that does not need to be done. The first of which is the IT bus radio system. We're proposing to return $785,000 of an unallocated $1.785 million budget. Where are we with the IT bus radio system, and are we certain that that work does not need to be done?
Yes, we're certain that that work can be done. Anything that we're returning to source is work that's either the tenders have closed or the estimates have been fine-tuned and so forth, and so the work will get done. Okay. So the next one, the 2011 transit priority measures. There's $289,000 of uncommitted balance, all of which is being returned back into the fund. Again, is there any particular transit priority measures that won't get done, or everything is done that comes within that budget envelope?
Mr. Chair, those were for some work that have now been completed. The costs came in lower than was expected. In some cases, we had budgeted for the work to be done as a standalone project, and the city was able to reduce its cost by bundling it along with some other infrastructure work that was going on in the same location.
Okay, and we saw that in the city's capital budget as well. The paratranspo engines and transmissions, we're proposing to return $160,000 of an uncommitted $222,000. The original authority was only $250,000, so we're going to return, almost half of that budget. What work doesn't need to be done there?
Just a reminder, we've ordered new para vehicles, so those are now starting to come on board. And so what the fleet team has done is they've looked at what maintenance needs to be done to get them to end of life. And as new vehicles come on, the old ones will be disposed of. So we don't want to do major overhauls on any of those units if they don't need them. So they've just done a fleet assessment on it.
What kind of risk do we have that the work may need to be done before those are end of life?
I can assure you that on the para fleet, they don't take any risks. They're going to, if the work needs to be done in terms of keeping it till the new vehicles are in, because it's staggered over the year, they'll do it. But the risk is close to zero.
Okay, but in terms of a budget pressure that might impose on us that we hadn't counted on,
we're fine there.
Okay. The technical training equipment is the next line item. We're proposing to return half that budget. What is the technical training equipment, and what work doesn't need to be done?
Mr. Chair, that is work that it was to provide our maintenance trainers with some technical equipment to help train the mechanics and garage attendants. What we've been doing there is we've been leveraging our own equipment that we have, as well as working with our vendors and our suppliers, incorporating that stuff into the tender process so that they can provide us with the tools, the aids that will help us provide that training to our maintenance staff.
Okay, so greater reliance on the vendor to provide that training then?
That is correct.
Okay. The only other one I had was the IT, under the Strategic Initiatives IT e-learning and video enhancement budget. We're proposing to return pretty much all the unspent, uncommitted balance out of the authority that, it's not quite half, but 45% or so of the original total authority. What was that work, and how are we able to return that level of funding?
Mr. Chair, that work, and there's been an amount in each year accumulating, that was to establish an e-learning program and purchase some software platforms. We've found that we can accomplish the same work without buying a specialized e-learning platform. We're still doing electronic teaching and electronic learning of what we're doing. We do a lot of very nice work with videos and with presentations, but we didn't need to purchase, as it turned out, the platform that we had thought we would need to do this work.
Good. Congratulations. That's important as the technology tools start to proliferate that are less expensive and consumer grade and just freely available. The more we leverage those, the better. I have one other question, but you may want to get back to me on it. I'm not quite certain. At line item 905490 under transit services, we're proposing to return $47,600. The unspent, uncommitted balance is $37,000. So I'm just wondering how we're going to return more than is available as unspent, uncommitted. We can take that one offline as well. Yeah, it's a tiny amount, obviously. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newsman. Thank you. Commissioner Mallow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. This is, for me, and I think for many people here, kind of the first go at a budget cycle. So it's always interesting. You know, I'm not surprised that we're not on budget. You know, a budget is a forecast, so it's not unusual. I guess as a citizen member, I'm concerned, though, that, and I share my colleagues' concern that we're leveraging the capital funding to make up for an operation deficit. Now, that may very well be the right thing to do, but I just don't know. So I'm just wondering whether or not we actually have governance or policy document that describes what the reserve is for, how it should be managed. That'd be very useful to me to understand whether or not it is the right thing to do. Specifically, I think at the end of the day, and it's been said, what we do know is those expenditures that caused or are currently causing the deficit will occur again next year. So it will be a pressure. We know that the ridership will not come to the rescue, at least in the short term. So I guess I'm just looking as a user and as someone that pays monthly fees. What I'm seeing, if I'm looking at this now, I'm seeing an increase in our fares. It's an automatic increase in our fares because our operating budget is increasing. Now, again, it may be the right thing to do, but I'm just not comfortable enough to know that we've actually exhausted all of our possibilities, that we've done everything that we can do to mitigate those pressures. You know, I appreciate that is ongoing business in any organization of this size. I also appreciate that reviewing the capital plan is a routine matter that takes place in any organization. But I'm just looking for some sort of assurance, or I'm just wondering if there's something else we can do to get that deficit under control, and so that it does not automatically create a pressure that we have to deal with next year. And I realize it's a complex organization. There's many different budgets, but nonetheless, that would be my preference. And nobody is getting pay increases out there, so we're living in a financially constrained environment, certainly in the public world. So before we go there, before we automatically use the reserve as a mitigation strategy, and by the way, that's no strategy, that's just an exit strategy, we need to be convinced somehow that we've done everything we could. And I guess I'm just not there, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mallow. Mr. Manconi, it looked like you were about to press your button, so if you have something to say, please do.
I just want to give the Commissioner assurance that we're looking at every single expenditure, and you know, I will reiterate, 4 people went home a few weeks ago and had to tell their loved ones they are not employed. That's how serious we're taking this. I can tell you I sat in front of my secretary and said, put a freeze on every single pen we're buying in this place. That's how serious we're taking it. because I know who pays the bill, and that's our riders, and that's our taxpayers. We have an obligation to make sure that we give you the best information possible and keep us on a sound financial footing. We want to maintain our fare box ratio, which is one of the best in the industry. We have a great service that we offer our customers, and I can assure you that this management team that's sitting at this table knows the mission, and that's to look at every single cost saving that's out there. And you know, I'm telling you the pen example, not to over dramatize this, but to tell you everything is on the table. Mr. Scrimger heard from me on Friday that I want to know how many maps we print and why they're delivered to every client service center, and stop printing if we don't need them. Everything is on the table. And when I send managers home as a cost containment strategy, we're serious about this, because we understand that we work for you and for the taxpayer and those people that pay their fares every single day. And I would encourage you that if you want to send me some ideas or suggestions, I had 2 councillors talk to me in the hallway the other day. That's where one of the map ideas came out, that apparently we're sending them out to a rural centre. I want to know why we're sending hard copy maps out there. And that may only cost $50, but that's $50 that I can get off the bottom line. So if you have any ideas, I'm wide open to them, and I'd gladly meet with you one-on-one to hear them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clearly, there's been some initiatives. Some of those have been painful. I understand that. I've been in that situation where you have to let people go. I'm just wondering, for example, the spending freeze that you have already put in place this year. How much will this save? I know it's been part of the model. It's already considered. We're still heading towards an $11 million deficit. But how much did these changes actually save this year?
So the 20% across the board cut before the corporate freeze, freezing 17 vacancies. These are above and beyond the corporate freeze, and the management elimination positions, $2.117 million. That's before the corporate freeze.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess just as a follow-up, I'd like to, if it's possible, if it exists out there, some governance document of some sort on the reserve fund and how that's to be leveraged or governed, I suppose.
Thank you very much. I'm looking to the treasurer or to the city clerk, either one, to maybe follow up with the commissioner offline on that.
We will do that.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Milner.
Thank you. 3 quick questions. One, what is the reserve fund at presently? That's probably for the clerk.
The reserve fund is currently, I think, at $45 million.
Okay, thank you. The one thing that I do notice missing from the report is a discussion of paratransport and what that is either contributing in a positive or negative way to this deficit. What can we speak to on that?
I believe para is mentioned in the report. I'm just looking for the, it's actually helping offset. There was some underspending that's occurring in there. I'm just looking for the line item.
Sorry, yeah, I found it. Yeah. And my last question, sorry, is back to the capital budget adjustments. Where are there any spots that we foresee an issue as far as overspending in capital budgets over the next year and a half?
No, in the review that the management team did, that we were actually looking for that because we didn't want to take unnecessary risks to compound the problem. Mm-hmm. So the capital forecast that you see right now is based on all the information we have, and we didn't see anything that was at risk in terms of overspending.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Crew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of quick questions and then really one comment on some of the general discussion. First of all, with regard to a quick question, we've referred a few times to those 5 management positions that have been cut. I'm wondering if you could speak in a general way about the effect, if any, on the organization as a result of no longer having those 5 positions.
People are working harder. People have assumed their responsibility and they're doing more work in the management ranks.
So those management roles have then been assigned to other managers. I understand that the people that are sitting at the table with you, they are already people that are working very hard.
Everybody at OC Transport works very, very hard, and these roles have been incorporated into other management roles.
As a general comment, an aside, I do support and do believe that you're making every effort to find us every penny that you can in this budget. And it's one of the things that I've seen from you over your term in office is that you are very, very committed to keeping this as lean an organization as you can, and I appreciate the efforts that you are making to find those. With regard to specific things on document 3, you can just comment on what the Transit Priority Road and Signal project resulting in a return of $2.3 million is. What was that project? It's the transit, it's line item 907-823, Transit Priority Road and Signal projects, resulting in a return of $2.3 million.
Mr. Chair, 907-823, that's an amount that was budgeted at $9.3 million. We're returning $2.3 million to bring it down to $7 million, I believe. We have found that some of the work that we were planning to do on Saint Laurent Boulevard was not physically possible due to the other infrastructure, the way the bridges and bridge abutments and culverts and intersections are built. And we've also reprioritized in discussion with the Transportation Planning branch of Planning Growth Management, the work, the transit priority work on Jeanne d'Arc Boulevard, where now that Stage 2 has been approved, that is less important than it was originally thought to be.
So the $2.3 million shown there is effectively the net savings, not that there was an entire project with regard to that canceled?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. And then finally, just to comment on some of the comments that Councillor Eglai and Leeper have made, as well as Commissioner Mello. Mr. Scrimgeour, I think that the regression model that you showed us in terms of predicting where fares go retrospectively, that's tremendous accuracy. I'm sure any statistician would envy that. I noticed that that was based on the factors of employment, weather, and the price of gas specifically. I'm surprised that one of the things that's not included there is kind of reflected implicitly in gas, but is the fares directly. So to that end, a couple of things do occur to me. Is in addition to federal employment levels dropping, I think that there has been an increase, as we've been saying throughout the term, also in the number of people that are teleworking. I think so there is an additional number of people that are likely working at home. So going forward, I think that that's a factor that could be considered. An old environmentalist saying is that you can never do only one thing. And I note that the city has a goal of increasing the number of people that are cycling to work, which I applaud, to 8% within a certain time frame, that currently that number is about half that. The city has invested a lot in cycling infrastructure, and I suspect, without knowing, that many of the people that are now choosing to take their bikes are not people that are leaving their cars at home, but are now choosing not to ride the bus. So I think going forward, a small factor to consider, but it is a factor, is if the city is promoting its cycling infrastructure and its healthy program of cycling to work, that is going to have an impact on our ridership levels. I've heard Councillor Eglai's comments on the possibility of finding some incentives for increasing fare ridership, such as a ride-free day or something like that. As Mr. Manconi said, all of that has a cost. I think the greatest incentive is trying to keep the fares as low as you can. And so to that end, I would, going forward, be in support of looking for increasing any deficit that we have, not through increasing the fare box ratio in favor of what's recovered through the fare box ratio, but through looking for a higher net requirement transferred from the city. And in particular, I know Mr. Manconi has been saying for a long time that there will be difficulties with the system as we transit to light rail. We experienced one last week Incidentally, I think staff did an excellent job of responding to that situation and correcting it. But I also think we would be naive to think that we're going to be batting 1,000 from here on in where the problems will be. So in light of the fact that the next couple of years will from time to time have LRT construction-related contingencies, I think that would be an excellent time to try and encourage people to stick with OC Transpo as much as possible through trying to keep the fares absolutely as low as possible. So it's just my thoughts on that issue looking forward. One last thing I noticed, too, is in the excellent figures that ridership is going down in all municipalities. I noticed there were recently a couple of outliers, such as in Hamilton and Oakville, and I think it would be very interesting just to have someone pick up the phone and call them and see if they've done anything, or if they found the golden marketing people, or something of that nature that accounts for the fact that there's a couple of jurisdictions that seem to have gone up when everybody else has gone down. So those would be my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Crew. And just to remind everyone, the fare box ratio is a policy, and I would anticipate will probably be part of the discussion the Treasurer is bringing forward vis-a-vis the Stage 2 financing or affordability update. So Councillor Cloutier is back on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner Crew touched on a couple of points that I wanted to follow up on. The regression analysis slide was absolutely fascinating. Mr. Scrimger, you had said that you thought it was perhaps the geography of employment centres that was affecting ridership. That was an additional factor, and Commissioner Crew brought up other elements such as telecommuting and investments in other infrastructure. Is it that difficult to test? Let's say there are 5,000 people at an employment centre, and we're usually looking at about a 30% ridership rate if they were downtown. Is it that difficult to test how many people are attending that employment centre and seeing if that is in fact the variable? Because it is a stunning departure from an amazing consistent model from 96 to 2011, and for the departure in the last 3 years. Why can we not test the ridership OC Transpo customer attending those employment centres, that if the federal government is moving to outlying areas?
Mr. Chair, no, it's not difficult to collect information at a particular location, and we do that continuously. We can, in most of those non-central employment locations, we can see change in how many people use our bus, how many people get on and off the bus, because we measure that quarterly. What is proving to be that we've not yet found how to do, let's say, is to get citywide data on employment or citywide data on employment change monthly. These graphs that we showed earlier are month-to-month changes, and those shapes you saw going like this were the changes from April to May to June to July of every year since the 90s. Those data are available generally annually or quarterly, but not monthly. If we were to develop a model that had a period of only every year instead of every month, we might very well be able to make it more precise, but I am not so certain it would be more useful to us, because we'd really only be able to explain what has happened probably 2 years after it has happened. So we'd be at this point right now, we'd be waiting for 2014 data to be available so that we could look at what has happened since the end of 2013. The way we do it right now, we're able to look back at what has happened in June. So it's much more immediate, it's much more useful if we can get it on a monthly basis.
Okay, I understand. Just to echo Commissioner Crew's comment, if we looked at a list of cities where ridership is flat, if we could, which ones, my question was, which ones are not flat? Which ones have comparable sized cities to Ottawa, or same models that we use are not flat? And as he said, what initiatives have they brought forth that enabled them, those cities, to continually grow their ridership?
Mr. Chair, we'll bring back this chart that we saw earlier, and the graphics on the right-hand side show the change, positive change in blue, negative change in red for the years of 2012, 13, and 14. What you can see here is that the reductions in actual ridership in 2012 happened in Ottawa, Hamilton, Victoria, and Regina. And the reductions, and Gatineau as well. The reductions in 2013 happened in Vancouver, Ottawa, Gatineau, and Burlington. And then in 2014, you can see it was in many, many more cities. But what you can see by the end is that where the first two-thirds of the cities were experiencing growth in 2012, where they were experiencing growth, they're down to tiny growth or very flat. So in cities like Toronto and Montreal, where there is no other choice of how to travel into downtown than transit, if you're a new traveler, a new employee downtown, they're not building enough road space for you. If you're taking the road, you're pushing somebody else off the road. You have to go by TTC or GO train in Toronto, by STM or AMT in Montreal, or you walk, or you cycle. And in every city across the country, you can see that the ridership is either growing very, very slightly or is decreasing in the year 2014. It's happened everywhere. It seems to have happened earliest and most severely in the Ottawa-Gatineau region. And I think in each case, it's the nature of how the economy is going and the nature of who the major employers are. And we do rely here in Ottawa and Gatineau on one single major employer. And when that employer reduces its workforce, then the ridership change is, as John said earlier, is immediate on OC Transpo.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cloutier. Are there any other questions related? Okay, seeing none, the recommendation is to receive the report and then capital closures and adjustments presented in documents 3 and 4. This is carried. Thank you very much. So we're moving on to item 3, the Ottawa Light Rail Regulatory Framework. And we do have one speaker on the presentation, but I'll ask that OC Transpo and the Solicitor's Office provide the presentation, then we'll take the speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Transit Commission. So this report it signals a key milestone in our work on the operating side of getting ready for the Confederation line. An integrated team of OC Transpo, a legal department, the Rail Implementation Office, and Rideau Transit Group have been working on this for literally hundreds of hours over the last year. This regulatory framework, which we're very proud of, we believe sets a new standard in terms of regulatory accountability and transparency and reporting. And so we're here today to present it to you. It's going to be 3 of us presenting. I'm just going to start off with some objectives, and then I'll wrap up at the end. In terms of what this report's about, it's about establishing the regulatory role that's required to monitor our compliance with the light rail operations, and it also establishes various other regulatory accountabilities for our light rail system under the jurisdictions of our city. Just waiting for the... Sorry, we're just bringing up a deck. On slide 2. And then a reminder for everyone is that we are a federally regulated transportation operation. And with that, federal legislation and regulations are applicable. However, as it pertains to municipal light rail systems, Transport Canada is not set up, organized, resourced to manage municipal light rail systems. They oversee heavy rail, so our Trillium line, the north-south line, is regulated by Transport Canada, but they are not in the light rail system oversight business. And accordingly, when we developed the strategy for the design, build, maintain of the light rail system, Council approved going to Transport Canada and asking for a delegation agreement, and that moved the project along significantly in terms of years, and also Transport Canada was very open to it because, again, they're not set up for municipal rail, light rail operations. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the City Solicitor. Rick.
Thank you, John. And Commissioners who are certainly members of Council from the last term of Council and certainly starting December of last year might find there's a sense of deja vu with some of the presentation because a lot of what you will hear is, oh yeah, we did that and now we're bringing forward the actual regulatory framework for the Commission and Council to make a determination on. Just by way of background, Commissioners will recall that in July of 2011, Council approved the implementation plan for the Ottawa Light Rail Transit System, now the Confederation Line. And as John already mentioned, the transit authority that we have with regards to the federal government has been set out in a delegation agreement that we have negotiated with Transport Canada, and we did so pursuant to Council delegation, and that was in October of 2011. In February of 2013, members and commissioners will understand and appreciate that the project agreement was then signed off with regards to those similar matters and also reference very clearly the regulatory nature and the unique regulatory nature that the City of Ottawa has and the Transit Commission has with regards to being the regulator under these matters. In December of 2014, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission may recall that there was something called the 2014-2018 Governance Review. About 4 or 5 pages in that massive 200-page document referred to the Confederation Line and the regulatory framework that we are presenting here today. So it's already received Council's initial approval to say, yes, go ye forth and do so. And recommendation 5A and B of that particular report spoke to the establishment of the position and duties of something called the Office of the Regulator. And section 2B of that, or sorry, 5B of that particular recommendation also indicated that we would bring this back in Q1 of 2015. So, Mr. Chair, before we go any further, 2 apologies to the Commission. Number 1, it is not Q1 of 2015. Staff have realized that during and immediately after an election year, perhaps we shouldn't be so quick to put up these types of policy decisions because we had the budget earlier this year and then we have the strategic planning exercise that Council had to go through. So this was one of a number of reports that was pushed farther on down the year. So my apologies for that overly optimistic forecast. Secondly, Mr. Chair, I'd also like to state, and maybe we can just go to the next slide, please. I don't want to steal Mr. Nahas's thunder, but when you look at slide 4, you will see it's entitled Compliance Officer. Now, when we wrote the governance report back late last fall, we called it the Office of the Regulator. I will be candid with the Commission. I was very keen on that phrase. I thought it was a very cool phrase. Thought we would be able to use it. But quite frankly, everyone, and I mean the working group with Rio and OC Transpo staff and my lawyers and RTG and BLG, our external lawyers, all said you can't call it the Office of the Regulator because the Commission and Council, i.e. the City, is in fact the regulator because of the self-regulatory model. So I conceded that we would have to change it, and that change name is here before you. But please, there's no major changes in any of the duties or the approach. It's just that they felt it would be better if we called it a compliance officer so it wouldn't confuse people. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Nahas to take you through the rest of this. You will note, however, that when you go through these slides, and certainly members of council who are on the Commission will appreciate, much of the approach that we have taken is the same way with regards to this compliance officer as we have previously done with other independent hires of the City, including the Integrity Commissioner and the Auditor General. So I just make that comment. And Taffy, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Rick. And so you'll see on slide 4, we do a high-level outline of the parameters that we're looking for in respect to the compliance officer. Properly, this is an individual called the Light Rail Regulatory Monitor and Compliance Officer, as the majority of the duties will be actually regulatory monitor, as you'll see in the description below. And so this person will be independent of both Transit Services and RIO, and that's a directive and focus on the delegation agreement that we received from the Transport Canada. Also, we're looking at a 5-year term, and this is generated predominantly by the cycle of reports that will have to be provided both through Council and through the Transport Canada, as well as external audits. And then the duties will, on a very high level, speaks of a review, monitoring, and reporting to both the City Manager and to this Commission here, and eventually it will go to Council. And there will also be, as you'll see through the later part of the slides, a report going to Transport Canada every year as well. Next slide. And so you'll see how this reporting will come through the City. It will start, again, of course, the regulatory monitor will work closely with the City Manager and Transit Services, developing a report that will come here every year, as well as a work plan. And the compliance officer will then present the report, which will give management an opportunity to have a companion or response report, and then eventually we'll reach here at Transit Commission, where here we will consider the compliance report as well as the companion report, and together with the work plan that is planned by the compliance officer. You'll see a note below that the initial work plan will be submitted to Council 3 months prior to revenue service. So we're looking in Q4 or 2017 or Q1 2018. And then eventually it will rise to Council for their consideration and then get approved through that formal process through the governance within the City. And so, much like the, as the City Clerk and Solicitor had mentioned, similar to the AG and the Integrity Commissioner process, we're establishing a hiring panel consisting of the Mayor, the 2 Deputy Mayors, as well as the Chair of this Commission, as well as the Chair of the Transportation Committee. And they will then do a traditional and formal engagement of hiring an external search firm, as well as conducting interviews, and then eventually making recommendations to Council, and then Council will appoint upon recommendation of the hiring panel. And what we have attached to the report, as you'll note, as document 1 is the bylaw that sets out 2 major areas that we're considering today. One, of course, is to establish the position and duties of the compliance officer, which we gave a high-level review earlier, and it's more detailed and into the weeds in the report describing all the different duties. And then also the bylaw performs a second function, which is to provide for other regulatory matters and accountabilities, both through Council and eventually to Transport Canada, which is requirements under the delegation agreement. And so our second recommendation, as you'll note from the report, speaks of this annual regulatory filing. It is required by Transport Canada, so they have delegated and the regulatory aspects to the city, but every year we do report back up to them and describe in routine fashion the ongoing compliance of the regulations. As you'll note here in this slide, number 8, the city manager will be the executive responsible for the ongoing compliance, as well as coordinating the reporting activity with the compliance officer, and then, of course, dealing with any deficiencies or gaps that are that appear throughout the year. And then we're asking now to ask for delegation that the city manager submit these formal reports each year, and there's a deadline of March 31st from the previous year, and that will be filed in the following year. Lastly, the report requests a third recommendation, and here staff's looking for, again, seek from the city manager the approval to enter into third-party independent investigation services. The city has, of course, the formal responsibility of doing any investigating of occurrences that happen on the OLRT, and then there's certain circumstances where the severity of an occurrence reaches a level that would require a third-party independent review, and we're asking that the city manager be delegated that authority in those circumstances.
Thank you, Taffy. And in closing, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, in addition to the oversight and reporting, and you can see there's multiple layers to this because our overarching principle is safety and security, is we've got a continuous improvement model, and I just remind everyone that a while ago I announced that we've hired a chief safety officer. That person forms part of our senior management team and reports directly to me. So he's the one that's going to be looking at all our safety management systems. So we're going to look at a rigorous reporting hazard and safety concerns process. We're also going to look at, we will be developing and implementing a safety management system, and if you go back to the APTA peer review on safety, they are very excited about, in a positive way, that we're going to be hiring a chief safety officer, and their findings of the APTA peer review said you had all the ingredients for a very robust system. You needed to put it together and into a comprehensive safety management system. So we're going to be doing that. We're also going to be providing annual performance reporting to our Transit Commission, our new performance measurement framework. We're going to include that details on safety and security on our light rail system. And then lastly, in terms of, in addition to the triennial audits that are required by the delegation agreement with Transport Canada, we're also going to do broad-based audits. That's what robust safety management systems do. We're going to look at it by a third-party reviewer. We're going to ensure that all our elements have been fully implemented in terms of the safety management systems and security systems. And the outcomes of all that work will be used to update and revise our safety management system. So you never want to stay stagnant. You want to continuously improve on any trends or analysis that you see through that culture of safety management and security systems. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That concludes the presentation. We're happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manconi. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the presenters. I think my questions are for the City Solicitor, and I wanted to talk and focus specifically on the role of the compliance officer. And while I appreciate that this is all sui generis and you're kind of making this up as you go, and although I'm reasonably confident that this sort of question of independence is sort of mapped out, I do have some lingering concerns that I just wanted to address to him. Looking at the Transport Canada delegation agreement on page 18 of our report, section 3.5 says the city shall establish procedures that require that compliance with the regulations be monitored and reported on to the city manager or designate by an independent internal auditor or other responsible city official. Now, a couple of issues there. One is, does the word independent modify responsible city official? I mean, I guess that's a legal interpretation question. I'm not going to get into that. But clearly, there was some expectation by using the word independent and using the internal auditor as an example that perhaps this person was going to be treated somewhat differently. So But then when we turn to the draft bylaws where we outline the role of the compliance officer, I'm looking now at page 29, we say here that the compliance officer shall report to and be under the general supervision of the city manager. So I think what's happening here, and I think what the report does, although I appreciate that we're all trying to get this right for the first time, is there's confusion between reporting reports to someone, so submitting reports to someone, which is one element of report, and reporting to in the sense of the administrative structure. And I think what 3.5 is speaking to is to whom do the reports go. And I think the report, our report, very smartly says, well, the report should go to the city manager and to city council. But I don't think 3.5, as interpreted in the staff report, is saying that the person should administratively report to the city manager. And the reason why I think this is a critical point is we don't want to put the city manager in the awkward position if, God forbid, something happens on the line 10 years from now where someone says, hold on a second, you have created a structure where the city manager is both the operator as Mr. Mancone's boss and also is the compliance officer's boss. And so are we putting the city manager in a tough situation? It's always easy when things are going well, but when things don't go well, are we creating a system where essentially the city manager is both sort of judge, jury, and prosecutor to a certain extent. Now, I recognize that that's mitigated through the fact that we have independent audits every 3 years, and I'm certainly heartened by that. But I guess looking through the report and seeing the requirements that the compliance officer work with the city manager on things like site visits and on quarterly reporting and so on, I don't think our food inspectors tell the restaurant owners beforehand that they're going to go check them out. Similarly, are we creating a system where the compliance officer is linked too closely operationally to the city manager? And I'm raising this to protect the city manager. I mean, I'm not raising this because, I necessarily think we should have, a totally independent system, but this is not akin to the Auditor General in the sense that the Auditor General is independent from the city administrator and reports to council. This is something different. And so I'm feeling a little uneasy about it, but I wanted to get the solicitor's response. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will try to ease the Commissioner's concerns in this regards. The way I have viewed this, both legally and procedurally, is akin to the Auditor General of the City of Ottawa. The Auditor General is, of course, a statutory officer under the Municipal Act. This is not that position because we are in, as the report indicates, such a unique position to be under the federal government's regulatory processes with regards to railroads, but at the same time, they have very clearly said, you go away and you deal with it, and we want to make sure that there is that arm's length sense of independence. That arm's length sense of independence is not with respect to the entire corporation or the city manager. With the greatest of respect to the GM and to the head of the Rail Implementation Office, it is with regards and independence for those two specific areas. And those areas eventually rise up through the city manager. So I take the Commissioner's point with regards to providing some ease for the city manager as well, but he already has that authority and those concerns, and I believe accountability. What we are trying to do through this process is ensure that all of the delegated authority to the city manager will be useful and facilitate any concerns the compliance officer may have. And that's why the report reads, work coordinated with the city manager to ensure that the compliance officer has full access to all areas, ensure there are open lines of communication. The delegation of authority bylaw passed by City Council with regards to the city manager is extremely broad, that the city manager has, for his business purposes, access to every site and access to every document or record this corporation has. So it's in order to facilitate those matters, Mr. Chair, that I think staff have made this presentation.
Thank you very much, Rick. Councillor Nussbaum, if you could follow up just on this one point, and then I was negligent. We do have a speaker, and then I could put you back on the list after
Thank you, and thank you for the answer to the solicitor. I did want to make sure that I understood. I had understood, and certainly the city's website indicates, that the Auditor General is independent of the city administration. So I'm a bit puzzled by the suggestion that these two positions are, yes, I understand that one is statutory and one is not, but the Auditor General, I don't think, has in the job description a line saying that he or she shall report to and be under the general supervision of the city manager. So just a clarification on that point. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Chair, and again, I apologize for the confusion. The Auditor General is a statutory Auditor General under the Municipal Act, and we are one of the few such municipalities to have that. The independence that is required under the delegation authority agreement with Transport Canada is with regards to the Rio office and OC Transpo. It is not independence from the rest of the corporation. It is for those operational purposes that those two specific areas are the ones that, with the greatest respect again to Mr. Manconi and Mr. Cripps, are not allowed to have a say as to when the compliance officer shows up or which documents he can have. They must respond accordingly, and if there is any scintilla of a problem in that respect, the city manager would step in and say, you shall grant those ASAP.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Connor. So I'm going to now ask David Jeans, who's registered to speak, to come and speak to the Commission. Thank you very much, Mr. Jeans. As you know, 5 minutes.
Sorry? Yes, I'll be brief. I will say that I've been interested and concerned with rail safety, rail investigations, and rail safety legislation for many years. Today, Mr. O'Connor referred to a 4 or 5 page report on the light rail regulatory framework that was buried in a very large report in 2014. I do admit that I missed that item. The report you have today has sections on public consultation on page 3 and advisory committees on page 13 that state that there have been no such consultations, only internal consultations with professional people involved with Rideau Transit Group or the city. And I wonder if this is appropriate for a matter of such public concern as railway and tunnel safety. I think in other cities there's been a much more open process to the public in terms of keeping people aware of what is planned. And if there had been such consultations, I'm sure I would have been able to raise these points earlier. On page 5 and 6 of the report, it's stated that the city does not have to create a new regulator position and role, and that the accountable executive will be the city manager. While I do understand Ottawa's unique position as a federally regulated transit system with rail transit components that also fall under federal rules, I wonder if one were to look at railways and transit systems that have extensive rail components, such as Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, even though they're not federally regulated, whether you'd see if it's normal to have rail safety as such a very small component of the responsibilities of the accountable executive. I know, for example, like major railways like Canadian National have a vice president responsible for rail safety, not the CEO, one is concerned that it should be a significant component of the responsibilities of the person with that accountability. And if I understand correctly, the actual working responsibility for safety will be distributed between many different departmental managers and the part-time compliance officer, and I understand he'll be here 16 weeks, 1/3 time. Now, Mr. Manconi did mention at the end of the remarks this morning that there are plans to hire a chief safety officer. That wasn't mentioned on the slides and wasn't in the report, so I'm not quite sure whether perhaps that answers in part my question, but I think that's an important matter. The agreement with the Federal Transport Minister, which is reproduced as Attachment 1, states on page 17 that prior to construction, the city shall develop, implement, and enforce a comprehensive regulatory framework for the safety of the railway. And so I ask, has such a framework been prepared? And one of the reasons I asked that question is that back in 2013, I attended and, in fact, was a speaker at a System Safety Society conference where the safety consultants hired by Rideau Transit Group also spoke. They had previously developed the rail safety plans for new rail transit lines in Vancouver and Toronto. And they referred to the difficulty of preparing the required plan for Ottawa when the city had not given them any contact person responsible for rail safety. Essentially, they were developing the plan in a vacuum. And I'm wondering, I know verbally Mr. O'Connor has mentioned, and Mr. Manconi have mentioned a lot of history of close cooperation that's been happening over the last couple of years. So perhaps that is the answer to my question. But at the time in 2013, prior to the start of construction, when there should have been a safety plan developed according to what the report says on page 17, there wasn't city engagement. And if we haven't yet hired a chief safety officer, perhaps there still isn't that single point of contact. Anyway, those were my remarks, and as I said, I might have made them sooner if there had been a more open consultation process on this important matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Maybe to ensure that everyone in attendance and those preparing information for distribution to the public through the media are fully aware of what's happening. Mr. Manconi, you can describe the hiring of that position and who is actually responsible on a day-to-day basis for the safety of Confederation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to assure everyone, including the Speaker, that we do have clear lines of accountability. We do have a full-time Chief Safety Officer that was staffed. That person starts on October 19th. He has extensive rail safety experience. He's actually the president of the Rail Safety, I can't remember the exact terminology for it, but he's the president of that association. He comes to us from Vancouver. It's in the memo that I released to members of Commission and the Council a few weeks ago. That's after a year-long North America-wide search. We do have clear lines of accountability. The City Manager, Kent Kirkpatrick, is what is called the Chief Accountable Executive. And what that means in simple term is, heaven forbid, if there's a major incident and someone walks in and says, who is the accountable person for this operation at the highest level, it is Kent administratively, and that reports through directly to City Council. In terms of day-to-day operations, that is myself as the General Manager, and the Chief Safety Officer, that person, and that's a very challenging job. That is the person that puts on what are called attestations, as Rick will support, every single month and year and on an annual basis, piece of paper on my desk that works its way up to Kent and to you that says this system is operating the way it should be, and here are the checks and balances on that. So we have the clear lines of accountability. We've had people from Canada, the U.S., and across North America working on this framework, including ex-Transport Canada officials on the RTG side. We've also had people that have built these systems around the world, and I can tell you they're very impressed about the level of accountability and direct transparency that we've put into this thing. So I'm highly confident that all the checks and balances are on there, and that you as the Board of Governors will be seeing things on a regular basis.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have questions for the presenter? Thank you very much, Mr. Jeans. Next on the list is Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Briefly, I am wondering why, with respect to the hiring panel, the deputy mayors were added to that panel. The mayor, the transit chair, the transportation chair all make a lot of sense to me. Without disrespect to my colleagues' excellent work as the deputy mayors, I'm trying to understand why they have been proposed to be on the hiring panel. One of the consequences of that would be that there would actually be no women on that hiring panel, which, if I understand, goes against all the best practices with respect to corporate hiring that are out there right now. So I'm wondering, why the deputy mayors, and what are some of the other options that we have to put together a hiring panel that might be differently constituted?
Mr. Chair, I'll answer that question since my office was one of the leading drivers of that particular recommendation. Again, I rely upon our previous past practice with auditors general and how they've been hired in the past, and it has routinely been with the mayor, the deputy mayors over the last term and a bit, and also then the particular chairs of the respective committees. So that comes directly from our past practice. Whether or not this commission or council decides to agree with that recommendation is certainly up to the Commission and Council.
So with respect to the past practice, when has this been used? The Auditor General, I believe they're added to the City Manager review, but what are those specific times when we're using the Deputy Mayors as HR responsibilities?
Those are set out previously with the Auditor General and the hiring of Ken Hughes, and with the, I think I'd have to go back to 2004. I don't think we had deputy mayors in 2004 because prior to 2010, we had a rotation mayoralty system for deputy mayors. So it's only since 2010 that we've made those adaptations.
Okay. So this is hardly a time-tested standard approach that we would just always use. It's not a policy the Council has approved.
It is certainly not a policy that Council has approved, but they have approved these hiring panels in each of those instances.
A couple of instances, yeah. So that does not seem to me to be an established practice, and I wonder what are some of the alternatives that we would have to constituting this hiring panel than just putting the deputy mayors on there?
Well, Mr. Chair, you could move any motion you would like to amend the recommended approach at this point in time, or you could do so at Council should this report rise in the same fashion.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Cloutier.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Our OC Transpo is federally regulated because it goes into the province of Quebec, and we are the only one. Is that correct?
No, Mr. Chair, there's also Windsor. They cross over into Michigan, so they're international. We're interprovincial.
I see. Are we the only one with a deregulation agreement with Transport Canada in terms of the operation of a rail system? And my question is, given the fact that the rail system is only in Ottawa, are we obligated to, is this a good structural framework? What are the advantages and disadvantages of we administering this as opposed to Transport Canada administering with the compliance officer?
So we're the only one with Transport Canada to have a delegation agreement. And when you look across Canada, you're entering into a very interesting space. We've mapped all that out in terms of how people are regulated. So if you look at Calgary, they're self-regulated because they don't have any provincial regulations or anything federally. So they do a peer review every 2 years to come in and see all the checks and balances that we've talked about. They do that on a biannual basis and do that. So you could, Toronto, same thing. They're self-regulated, but they're managing themselves. They don't have any oversight.
And you're referring to their rail systems?
Correct, their rail systems. We think this is a very good thing. I mean, if you go back to the original report, this was about I'll be bold here. I'm not sure you'd even have shovels in the ground if you were, and this is not to criticize Transport Canada, it's just they're not set up for light rail. My role on the CUDA board, we're actually looking at how regulations are applied across Canada because there is so much light rail being built. Specifically in Ontario, there's extensions going on in Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, and so forth. So it's a new space for everybody in terms of because there is so much light rail being built. But we think it's a very good thing. And Transport Canada, we've done our checks with them. They're not in an endorsement role because they've delegated that to us. But we think we've got all the right checks and balances in it, and we think it's good for this city in terms of getting light rail built faster. That was part of the issue, but also getting the construct and the environment in for safety and security on the system, because nothing exists at the federal level. They're not in the light rail business.
Was it our choice to, I know Council passed in 2011, it was entirely our choice to go this way?
Yes, it was there was a review done by, I believe it was KPMG, in terms of what are you going to do about the regulatory environment, and this was our choice that we put forward.
Do you have an estimate of the costs of the compliance officer and the whole system, of course, the office that will support he or she?
Yes, our light rail director who's here today, Michael Morgan, has done a mapping out of all those checks and balances that we've talked about. We believe it's going to be about $250,000 for the first couple of years, and then it starts to dwindle down. And the first couple of years are heavy because you're in the testing and commissioning phase. You want to get this right, and you want to make sure all the checks and balances are in there, and that's also drives all kinds of things such as the connection to the P3 contract and so forth, and the go, no go in terms of that process. So about $250,000 for the first 2 to 3 years, and then it starts to taper down.
Merci, Monsieur le Directeur Général. Thank you.
Merci, Conseil Cloutier. Councillor Egli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, as I went through the report and I hear more discussion, can you give us a bit of a better sense of what there is a skills section in the report, but it's a little general. You know, as I read the report and I hear the answers, you know, this person's part engineer, part auditor, part lawyer, part transit professional, you know, such as yourself, Mr. Manconi. So what are we really looking for here? Like, what's our pool of candidates, if you will?
My advice, and I'm staying very independent of the hiring panel, but my advice to Mr. O'Connor has been that you want to think through the skill sets of someone who has operated a light rail high-capacity system. You will be the busiest LRT in North America on day one. I think what's working in your favor is that, and I'll just put one caveat, that you need to check the biases of those people in terms of how they work and their thought process. I think what's working in your favor is that there's a lot of retirements in the transit industry of people that have run successful systems that have the scope and the skill sets to be, you know, at that right level in terms of understanding how the operation works and how to look for the right things and ask the right questions. Because in that compliance mode, it's all about asking the right questions and looking and delayering the onion. So that's my view on it. And Rick, did you have any other?
Just to say, Mr. Chair, that we would work with our external service provider in any sort of hiring process and cast the net as wide as we possibly could. And we always take the general manager's comments with the appropriate due diligence as we work through this.
And I guess the follow-up question is, again, as I understand the report, so initially this would be almost a full-time position, and then it would dwindle down somewhat over time as we get the line up and running and be more like our Integrity Commission, for example?
That is exactly the example we would draw on, Mr. Chair, is that when we did that through the clerk's office, I think we targeted it at 2.25 the first year, and it has gone down ever since because a lot of the processes and procedures and templates are put in the first year, and then after that there's just reliance upon them.
So this is someone then, not to get too practical here, but this is someone who would be essentially be working on a per diem basis as opposed to a salary basis?
Yeah, it depends what is eventually negotiated, but I would look towards that sort of thing. I wouldn't want to hire someone at you know, $100,000 a year. I would certainly be looking at perhaps a stipend and then a per diem for any work over and above that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Egli. Commissioner Mallow.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much for the presentation. This is an important program. I'm familiar, I come from the aviation world, so I understand the importance of safety. And, you know, we have really detailed functional responsibilities enunciated in this document. Very demanding tasks that we expect this individual to do. And I was surprised at the end, when I got to the end of the document, to see that we're only talking about someone that would be part-time and not supported by staff other than the staff that exists right now, would not have any real capacity to investigate much of anything. So that just came a little bit as a shock to me, reading through the document. But I'm certain that you've benchmarked your proposal against other light rail organization. I'm just curious to see what your thought was on this particular issue of actual capacity to do the work we're asking or expecting them to do.
I'll leave the specific details of the support to the General Manager, but in response, Mr. Chair, I think this Transit Commission and Council have a very, very regular governance review process. And our governance review process takes place at the end and right at the beginning of a transition between one council and another, and one transit commission and another, and then also every 2 years thereafter. So I would expect with Mr. Manconi, with the city manager, and with this particular compliance officer, this will become a regular piece for review. And while I'm in no position as your legal counsel to provide that sort of advice at this stage, I would think this would be an evolving thing that if 2-4 years down the line, the city manager comes back and says, you know what, we need this person full time, then that would be the Transit Commission's and Council's decision to make. So I want to offer that there is an ongoing review. As Mr. Manconi, we're very keen on efficiencies and trying to get better. We don't push this on a shelf now that Commission and Council make a decision and we leave it there. There will be changes. John?
Certainly on the workload comment, I think the 250. Well, not I think I know the 250,000 is very high because I agree with you. I don't think that person is going to be certainly the first couple of years doing things part-time or on their own. They'll probably have some resources that they're going to have to bring in on their side of things. What we didn't want to do is build a big bureaucracy to support them and then have to shut that down. So we're going to push that out to the private sector in terms of getting them set up. So if they need resources, they'll do that. The other thing that's at their disposal is through the P3, we will have a safety management system delivered by the consortium, which we will sign off on, and our chief safety officer, and I'll go through this chain of command that you're approving, that you approved today. And then also we have a rail director and a chief safety officer that also is there for resourcing and so forth. So that 250,000 is high for exactly that reason, Commissioner Mallow, that they're not just going to be a one-person, kind of just doing a few things in between. I suspect the first couple of years there's a lot of billable hours with support staff with them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Mallow. Are there any other questions relating to the report? Seeing none, so the recommendation to the Transit Commission is on page 3 and page 4 of the agenda. Are those carried? Carried. Thank you very much. We have information previously distributed, the implementation of the Presto Smart Card, which everyone, I hope, has seen. And are there any notices of motion for future meetings? Seeing none, any inquiries? Seeing none, other business, and adjournment. Carried. Thank you very much.